All right, good afternoon, good morning, whatever time zone you are in, folks. Welcome to today's webinar. The topic today is 7 sins of Scrum and other Agile anti-patterns. This is a very interesting topic. We often observe this phenomena of Agile anti-patterns with many of our clients and our teams practicing Agile. So this is a notion where something looks good, looks like good idea, but ends up being not quite that way and being against the Agile spirit and Agile mindset. So we'll cover this topic in some detail. And before I introduce our featured speaker for this topic, Todd Little, let me just go over quick mechanics, logistics for today. So as usual, we'll have 45 to 50 minutes of this presentation. We'll take some questions along the way. So you guys feel free to send in your questions. If something doesn't make sense, you want to clarify, just ask that question. I'm Hemant Alhans, your usual moderator for these sessions. I will keep track of the questions and inject those questions that make sense to be injected along the way. And then others I'll keep for taking them towards the end. We'll reserve 10 to 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. And we are recording this, and we'll make the PowerPoint / PDF as well as the recording available to folks who may have registered and either attended and want to attend. With that, let me introduce our speaker. Todd Little is our featured speaker. He's been around Agile development from well before we called it Agile. So he has significant and relevant experience in observing these patterns. Todd is currently Vice President of Product Development at IHS, a leading global provider of information, analytics, and expertise. He's also founding member and past president of the Agile Leadership Network, and he has served on the board of directors of both the Agile Alliance and Agile Leadership Network. He also is a co-author of the book Stand Back and Deliver, Accelerating Business Agility. So with that, let me turn it over to Todd. Todd?
All right, thank you, Hemant. So today we're going to go through a series of things that I've deemed as the 7 sins of Scrum and other Agile anti-patterns. This is gained through observing and watching teams and some of the challenges that I see, and some of the, not just the challenges, really the opportunities of going beyond that. So first my disclaimer, I'm not going to limit myself to 7. 7 will sound like a good number because it's of the 7 sins, and it's not necessarily sins per se. Some of these things are actually some pretty good ideas, but what I really am trying to call out is that there's opportunities to really go beyond and get to an even higher level. And it's not specific to Scrum either. It goes nicely with alliteration. It's generally patterns that I've seen regardless of the approach. So with that disclaimer, let's get into where we're going. So where I'm going to start, bring up the Agile Manifesto, and the part that I really want to call out in the manifesto is the last line, which we often forget, which is that while there's value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. The manifesto is a statement of values, and there is value in both sides of the equation. And what I'm going to present in this case is also, in the case of sinning, and how it goes into the anti-patterns. First, we'll start with the definition of where I'm looking from anti-patterns. And I like Jim Coplien's definition. An anti-pattern is something that looks like a good idea, but which backfires badly when applied. So with that, let's look at how I'm going to present this in terms of various sins and what the redemption of those sins are. So we'll start with the framework of the Sinner's Manifesto, which is we think we know what we're doing. It looks like a good idea, or someone told us the best way to do it, so we'll do more of it. Through this, we may have come to accidentally value, and then some potential sin over some potential virtue. And the point here, that sin is not always a bad idea. There may be some significant value in moderation, but in excess, it can be an anti-pattern. The path to redemption is to look to the virtue. And that's really what I'm going to be calling out here. Is a set of patterns here. We see this type of thing. Sometimes that's an actually okay thing. But if we don't get beyond that and actually get to where we really are trying to get to, we may get stuck. And what I'm about is trying to make teams great. I really don't care so much to see, it's sometimes nice to suck less, but really the opportunity is to be great. And to be great is in my mind, is to really stretch towards these virtuous areas. So that's what I'm going to be calling out. Since we're talking about sinning, remember that some of what I come out with is, oh, but that's heresy. You know, these are things that are, you know, it says you have to do things this way. That's why we do it that way. But heresy is part of it. Part of learning is to be a bit heretical sometimes. Galileo was a heretic. And I love this quote: God endowed us to sense, reason, and intellect. He has not intended to forgo their use. And that's really what we're trying to do. Is Agile development is about learning. It's not just doing things because you're told to do things. It's about learning and getting better and really using your intellect and reason and sense in order to really figure out how can you get better and applying that. So with that, we start with potential sin number 1. So what you're going to do is I'm going to have 7 buckets of sinning categories, and then we'll go through it. And I have to start with the first and foremost, processes and tools over individuals and interactions. And this is the only one that really is specifically from the manifesto, but I call it out, and there's a really good reason why individuals and interactions over processes and tools was the first element of the manifesto, and it's because it's so important. Individuals and interactions is how we get knowledge work done. Processes and tools are there to support individuals and interactions. Yet when we roll out Agile development and we roll out Agile transformations, what I see so often is that processes and tools take front row. Let's get the tool employed. Let's get all our processes. Agile is a process, and therefore that's how we're going to have to make this happen. But individuals and interactions are so important, and I love this version of the manifesto from Alexei Kravitsky. Blah 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 blah. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Blah 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 blah. It is really fundamentally, knowledge work is about engaging individuals. It's about engaging teams and getting individuals and their interactions to work with teams in order to deliver great software. You solve this problem, you solve individuals' interactions, and a lot of other things will resolve themselves. So let's go into some subcategories here. One of the common ones I see is Agile is the tool. And to me, the virtuous approach to this is not that Agile is the tool, but that we have tools which will support our agility. So often in these transformations we see, oh, we've got to have, you know, I'm Agile because I'm using such and such tool, or I'm Agile because our Agile process is working this certain way. And the reality is all they have done is substitute one tool for another, or they've substituted one process for another, and maybe they've gotten some improvements, but the real opportunity is to move towards much more of an Agile mindset, and with the mindset, that's when the tools can support that mindset. So the tools are supporting mechanism, not front and center. The other variant of this is Agile as a process versus where I'm really trying to get to is agility as a mindset. Agility is about a combined set of values where individuals and interactions are really important. It's about a learning mindset. It's about feedback mechanisms that enable you to get better. It's about delivery of value. It's about collaborating with customers. All of these things go together in a mindset of agility. It's not about following a process. It's not about, oh, we've got to do all the specific things that the book says we have to do. No, actually, a lot of teams that are really awesome have all the essence of the mindset, and the process solves itself. The process evolves itself. The tools, they develop the tools, or they structure tools, or they work and get a tool that supports them. And this is really important, that the essence of agility is really the core, not the specific procedural implementation or tool implementation. With this, we often hear people talking about best practices, and my perspective on things is there are good practices. There are practices that tend to work. There are things that we should know. We should have these practices in our toolbox. But the concept of best practices is actually sometimes an anti-pattern. And the reason it's a bit of an anti-pattern is because it implies that by saying it's a best practice, it means it applies all the time. And the reality is that there are good practices that apply in a particular context. And many contexts, they apply really well. And other contexts, they may be totally wrong patterns. And so the idea of best practice is a dangerous one. And what we really look at, I think, in agility is understanding what practices are available in our toolkit, but really get core to the principles and the values and the mindset of agility, get the principles and values down, and the practices, choose the practices that apply by keeping those, by honoring those principles and values in the context that's really important. So with that, the similar piece to that is we have this one-size-fits-all, either that be practices or a process or whatever. And the virtue here is realizing that there's a contextual element to everything we do. Every project is different, every product is different, every individual and every team is different. Different things work. In some cases you have co-located teams. Certain things can work really well with co-located teams. In another case you have highly distributed teams. A different set of contexts will work. So it's really important that we use our mind, we use our understanding of the context, and then we learn, and we use agility as a learning tool to get better and better. And then the last one I've got here in the context of individuals and interactions is the potential sin being collaboration, which is a good thing, but what we really want is not collaboration for the sake of collaboration, because that's just like going out to the beach and singing Kumbaya. We don't want that. That's collaboration, but it doesn't necessarily result in give us results. What we're really driving towards is shared ownership, and shared ownership is really how we get there is through collaboration. So the virtuous approach is to get to a point where we have shared ownership, where the team owns something together and is working together, not collaboration in and of itself. So the collaboration is useful, but in and of itself, it's not the result. The result is getting...
Can we take a quick question on this page before you move on?
Yep.
Could you illustrate perhaps this with an example of where a team would be collaborating and it ends up being collaboration for collaboration's sake and therefore comes in the way of the Agile virtues or values?
Well, I see this behavior frequently when teams are having some of their early planning sessions or early meetings, and they get together and they have these big meetings, and they just feel great about having these big meetings. Yet they feel good about the meeting itself, but they didn't actually come away with a sense of shared ownership out of that meeting, and then they don't follow through on that. So the meeting itself became the thing that they all felt good about, not the fact that they're going to take something away from that meeting and actually deliver against it and own it and collaborate with other teams or collaborate with other individuals. But so this is a fairly common one I see, sort of the act of collaborating is the feel-good event, but it's temporary. It doesn't have holding power going forward.
Okay.
Some of that comes from these ceremonies of meetings.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. So now we'll move on to sin number 2, this category of sin number 2, which I've called status over flow of value. And the key element of this one is that status, while potentially useful, is looking in the predominantly looking in the rearview mirror. And what I'm really calling out here, a flow of value, is looking forward. How are we actually delivering value? How are we making sure that everything we're doing is focused on making sure that we are generating flow, the project is flowing forward, and it's actually we're removing things that are impediments in the forward, as opposed to looking backwards, and oftentimes when we look backwards, trying to show ourselves as doing well. So this subcategory here then called showing progress versus over delivering value. Oftentimes I see the showing progress is status reports that are everything's green lights, all is wonderful. It's basically trying to say that everything's in great shape. Yet oftentimes either two things are happening. One is they haven't looked forward to see what's in their way. The other thing that I see that's a big problem is they're showing status, yet they haven't actually delivered tangible working software that's been put into customers' hands. So there's a lot of oftentimes the water scrum fall types of approaches where they're doing a lot of work up front, but they don't actually deliver, or where they're delivering incremental architectural components, yet they haven't delivered full workflows through the system. So this element of showing progress is something that we have, it dates back from our times in traditional, more waterfallish types of approaches where say everything's good, everything's good. What we're really trying to do with agility is have more transparency, have more upfront delivery, and ongoing incremental delivery of value so that we have a much better understanding of tangible progress rather than allowing typically one person, a project manager, scrum master, or someone to collect all the data and say, yeah, that project is green. When in fact, the best way to do it is to know what have we actually delivered, what have we actually got in the hands of customers, have that feedback, and so everyone's engaged and understands where they're at. Related to this is checking boxes, which I see frequently. A lot of more traditionally trained project managers seem to be very good at, organization is about checking boxes, and so if I check this box, it's done. Can be useful. Check boxes can be very helpful and useful. What we really, though, the thing that really takes us to transformational state is getting a team in a mode where the team and everyone involved is learning and adapting. It's really about the feedback loop, and in order to have that feedback loop, you really have to get to the point where you're in a mode of flow of value, and continually delivering value. You deliver value. Delivering value can be in the form also of learning. That learning comes back as feedback to help the team figure out how to adjust and adapt. And that learning can be both within your adapting your product. It's also very critical to have delivery as the feedback loop in the form of feedback from customers. On this element of flow of value, we have the efficiency of the individual, or once individual saying my part is done. What we really care is how is the team performing? Is the team done? Has the team finished the stories? And has the team delivered? Because we want the team working. This is the case. We want the collaboration in terms of this shared ownership. If we really have true shared ownership, you don't have somebody saying my part is done. You have people asking what else can I do in order to help the team deliver. So it's getting past the optimization of the individual, focus on the individual, and moving more towards how can we get teams to own things, how can we get teams to collaborate. We tend to focus oftentimes, so see people try to focus on, I've got to get individual utilization up. I've got to make sure that person has some free time. Let's make sure that we utilize him fully. What we really are trying to understand, and again, this is getting into the team in collaborative mode, what's the team's throughput? How will we have people all working together? If you get people all working together, this element of trying to focus on maximizing individual utilization essentially goes away. So the real essence here is, how do we get the team to own it? How do we get the team throughput up? And the key to this is that if we do too much specialization, if everybody is a brain surgeon on the team, then we can only service brains. Right? What we're really trying to get towards is more T-shaped individuals, more generalization, where individuals have a depth, they have an area of specialization, but they have a breadth and they're able to cover multiple things. If we work in this way, if we have teams and we work to develop our individuals in a way where they have more of a generalization capability, then we have the ability to work together as teams. We can have team ownership, and when we have a situation where teams are our delivery mechanism, not a collection of specialized individuals. Specialized individuals are great when you have true brain surgery. You want a brain surgeon. The reality is so much of what we do that we tend to have a penchant to over-specialize when in fact I think we can deliver. I've seen teams that have delivered more when they've been able to have more of a generalization, a more collection of generalists. All right, with that, we'll move on to potential sin number 3. Which I've as a broad category.
Todd, take one question on the previous page, which is, do you have any suggestions and ideas how to encourage generalization in a Scrum team? How to make that happen?
Yeah, so I think it's weaning away. I mean, we have a lot of places where it tends to be very easy to specialize. We've set up our whole educational system towards specialization. It's really, and you see it certainly in the medical industry. You can't go anywhere to a generalist anymore. Everything's a specialist, it seems like. So it's inverting a lot of that cultural overlay and knowledge. So I think a lot of it is really supporting the team in that and working in multiple angles around this team ownership. How do we get towards more team ownership? What you realize with software developers is the reality is many software developers do, while they may have an area of specialization, and the key part is we're not taking away that depth. That depth is still there. They can still have that. But we're really just exposing them to broader areas. And I find that actually when you offer that up to software developers, they're generally pretty willing to take that on. Software developers like to learn, and most of them like to learn and take on more things. So I actually find that individuals are more willing to do this. Where the challenges tend to be is because we have oftentimes created line managers that have specialization as their area of focus. And the line managers are actually sometimes the biggest problems, that we have to remove that impediment or train them or put them into different roles. So middle management can oftentimes be some of our biggest obstacles here. But the individuals I tend to see, there's a few that are not going to go in this, and that you can work with that if they're still valuable, right? I think a lot of it's also in recruiting. How do you recruit for people that are willing to, how do you identify team, collaborative, shared ownership individuals, right? It's part of the interview process. Are they always going to be a specialist? Are they always going to be individual, or are they going to be collaborative team players that will take ownership and deliver? And that's an element that you're looking for in part of your building your overall capacity of your organization.
Great, thanks.
All right. So we'll move on to potential sin number 3. Broad category here of stories over strategy. Stories, of course, the stories are very valuable. What I find, though, oftentimes is that if we have a collection of stories and we don't have an overarching strategy, if we don't understand what our strategy is and we don't have a guiding principle of strategy, then we end up with a really convoluted and a challenging effort for the development team. They can work through the stories, but in fact, what we've missed out in understanding what are we actually going after. So in this broad category of strategy, we've got a couple of key areas here I want to call out. So the first one, I think, is a metaphor that I've been developing that I think is representative of a lot of strategies I see. I call it buckets over filters. And the question is, if you think about your strategy, is your strategy acting more as a bucket, which it collects things, or is it acting as a filter where it filters things away? Another way of saying this is if your strategy doesn't tell you how to say no to something, then you probably don't have a real strategy. A lot of strategies I see, they tend to be motherhood and apple pie. Everything can fit into that strategy. It's like let's go do good stuff. It tends to be simplifying things, but often strategies tend to show up in that form. And then the game comes, well, how do I make this fit into the strategy? And that strategy then becomes a bucket collecting things, as opposed to what really is powerful from the strategy is when the strategy acts as a filter and says, okay, here's an idea that's come in. How does it work from our decision filter? If it doesn't pass our decision filter, maybe a good idea, but it's not something aligned here with our strategy, and it's something we should defer until potentially we've solved this strategic issue, and then on our next strategic issue, this is where that would fit. So, it's not to say that a good idea, you can't come in and say, well, it's against our strategy, so we won't do it. But at least you can have that conversation as a filter, whereas when your strategy is acting as a bucket, there's no conversation. It's just always collecting things. So real good strategies are there to filter things out, and they're there to help you really make the hard decisions as to what not to do. And too often I see teams organizations and teams that don't have strategies that help them do that. And part of the problem is we have the potential of sin of gluttony. I want it all. And part of it, what I really love about the lean startup community, is the concept of a minimum viable product. We can't have it all. We're not going to be able to get it all. What do we actually want to get out to learn from? What can we get out to either create value or to create learning? And that's what we get from the minimum viable product. We don't need a wedding cake at the end. What can we get by with a cupcake to learn something quickly? How quickly, going back to the whole element of flow of value, how quickly can I get something in the marketplace in front of customers that will help me test my hypotheses, help me learn whether I'm actually heading in the right direction. I don't need it all up front. In fact, if I try to get it all up front, I usually end up with a mess. We say we have to listen to customers, so potential sin of listening to customers. I'm not saying listening to customers is bad. What we really need to get to, and where really great companies are, is that they know how to listen and learn for what customers really need. I was in a product management role for a number of years, talked to a lot of customers, found a lot of things, a lot of interesting things happening, great ideas coming from the customer. Almost always, whatever I would talk to them about was the problem they happened to be facing that particular time. So the essence of when you're really trying to get to, in great product management and great strategy, is listening to customers and then debiasing what they tell you to find out what they really need, what their real problem is, and anticipating where it will go. And then collating it, because you're oftentimes in a product space, are trying to meet a market, not a particular customer. So it's a challenging, product management is probably the most challenging role of all within an organization. Really great ones know how to do this, and it's beyond just collecting data from a customer. I typically oftentimes see one of the biggest anti-patterns is a product manager latches onto one particular customer, and that's where the feedback comes from, that one particular customer. That's very limiting. They're not actually doing great service. Yeah, we end up solving it and create a product which meets the needs of one person, not necessarily meeting the market needs. So it's really about collecting information, doing the canvassing, debiasing the information, and anticipating what the real problems are and what problem are they willing to pay you to have go away. And another one I see also from product management frequently is the product manager certain that they know what the customers need, and they don't even bother to set up learning activities in order to determine whether or not customers really need that. This is a great element of the lean startup, is the concept of, the reborrowed concept from Shewhart, Cycles, and Deming, build, measure, and learn, plan, do, act, and validating your hypotheses. I have a hypothesis that a user or customers want this type of feature. Now, how would I design experiments that would help me understand, can I validate that hypothesis? Because if they want it and they'll pay for it, can I do that? What's the smallest experiment that I can create to validate that hypothesis and learn? Get value delivered to the customer in the form of either actual value or in the form of learning. Have that feedback come in so I can validate it so that I can deliver on something that's actually going to create value. And so often, if we think we know what they need, we've spent a long time doing it, we don't have the feedback loops, and by the time it's delivered, I've seen so many times where it just totally misses the market because it didn't have the validation from customers. So get validation from customers early. Yes?
Can we take one more question on this page now?
Sure.
So the notion from what you said a few pages ago, someone picked up on the filter, the strategy of not a bucket but a filter, and then this knowing what to build. Is there an over-reliance on a product owner role, that a product owner will act as that kind of a filter and will do everything, meaning not just listening to the customer, but actually really understanding and the customer? Or so can you talk a little bit about the over-reliance, implied over-reliance on a star product owner versus the empirical build, learn, measure, learn kind of a cycle, which is more data-driven rather than reliance on a star product owner?
No, great. So I think you hit on a very, very key thing. I think that one of the somewhat of the weakness of Scrum is the over-reliance on the product owner without really calling out to the extent that product role has to actually be a superstar, and the type of thing that we expect from traditional product managers is really a challenging role. And as an industry, we're not necessarily very good at product management. We're not necessarily very good at product ownership. Yet you solve that problem if you have really great product management, really great understanding of your strategy, really great understanding of trying to build the right things. Again, so much of these things will just solve themselves. The teams, if you've got teams oriented towards building something that you know, and you have rapid feedback from customers that you're delivering on the right thing, teams will rally behind that. And all of the things that we try to do by creating agile processes and putting processes in place, all of that will evolve itself. It'll all solve itself. So yes, I think there's a real challenge here that the product owner role, to a limited extent, I think, or to some extent, I think was a, is a lot of agility came from a developer or project manager perspective. I think we punted a little bit on the product owner role and said, well, if we only had this perfect Superman who would generate great user stories, then everything would flow right. And the answer is yes, we would. If we had great user stories and everything was perfect, then everything else flows greatly. The problem is finding people that can do that and helping that role become really great at becoming great product owners. And so I think the toolkit for the product owner is just in its infancy. And it's why I say that what we really need to try to do is help product owners get better. And the types of tools that I see, is helping them understand what are their filters, what are their decision filters that are driving them, what's their strategy, are they calling out a strategy, are they validating their hypotheses. I think lean startup, lean product management is a great tool for the product owner, and the challenge is for them to acknowledge that as a tool rather than, typically I think what happens is we put people in product management, product owner roles that are experts in the technology or experts in the particular domain, but they aren't necessarily experts in the business understanding the customer feedback mechanisms or the feedback loops. So we're calling on them to do so much. We need to help them, and we need to give them tools, and we need to help support them across the board. Yeah, I think it is a limitation and a challenge in many Scrum implementations.
Great, thanks.
Moving on in the same category, just is tasks over stories. Yes, the further down we get, we don't want to emphasize them too much. Tasks are great tools for decomposing work, but they shouldn't be taking over for stories, and stories shouldn't be taking over for strategy. So just make sure that we have, and it's not necessarily you got to have everything line up from one to the other. I'm not worried about having a taxonomy that pulls it all together, but what we really want to understand is where's the value proposition. The big value proposition is understanding your decision filters. Down layer, have your tasks if it helps you, right? And many times it does help you get your work breakdown. But related to this, and this is where the developer side of it comes in, is the potential sin of just following orders, delivering on those tasks because that's what somebody told me I had to do. And the real virtue here for developers, and I really coach all of my developers to understand the why behind what they're doing. And the reason I ask that is because they're making their own decisions on how to implement something, and if they understand the why, if they understand the problem we're really trying to solve, they could be making so many decisions that align themselves to that why. So it's their own decision filters. If they could do it, if you can take it's something that's not terribly important, it's just something that we have to have, but it's not important to be differentiated in the marketplace, I can take much simpler approaches to that than if something is going to be a leading part of the flagship product. In this case, I have to do it really, really well. So the question is, how do I implement this? How does it align to why? And I also tell my developers, they should be able to ask the product owner why at any time. And if the product owner gets irritated with them about asking why, then it's oftentimes a huge anti-pattern that the product owner doesn't have a good answer for it. Because if a product owner is doing their job, they should be understanding why, and they should be able to explain why to any developer. If they can't and they get irritated, it probably means they don't really have it well formulated. So I find this is really critical to having teams that can work together, bind together, and deliver on value in a consistent fashion.
Can we take one question on this page, Todd, on asking why? This is an interesting one. So does a UX designer have to convince every developer around the design decisions?
Ah, that's an interesting one. Do they have to convince every developer? Certainly, it's a lot easier if they have alignment, right? So if they don't have alignment, the problem we have is that the developer is the one who's writing the code. So they're going to, if you don't have alignment, you can get things that can be really challenging. So obviously, yeah, if you've got alignment, it's better. If you don't have alignment, certainly sometimes you just have to come in and say, this is what we're doing. It's why we're going to be doing it. It's my job to do it, and you know, you've got to get the team to back it up, and you know, you've got to come up with you know, when you have a disagreement, what is your mechanism for solving that? But you know, in general, I mean, my view is if you can get the team to work as a team, then you know, you can get the team aligned along a consistent goal, you're going to go a lot faster. If you don't have alignment, you've got to figure out how can you get temporary alignment. You may need to get temporary alignment of some form. It's just you know, you find out who's the decision maker on this issue, agreed on who's that decision maker, and make a decision to move forward. And then you work on, well, what's our hypothesis and what are design decisions that we could use in order to allow the system to give us the feedback mechanism that we need. So, you know, if you got it, you know, the one thing I do say is if you have a disagreement between the developer and the UX designer, that's a ripe opportunity for an experiment in learning. So,
right. So you do A/B testing or something of that sort to validate.
That you can get that actually in something in the hands of users and try both approaches, and then say, what's the quickest thing we could do to actually resolve this? Because we've got a disagreement, and if you can get data from the field that resolves the issue, then you know, that speaks loudly.
Right. Great. Thanks.
All right, moving forward to potential sin number 4, we have crap over craftsmanship. This is the one that Uncle Bob Martin, who was a signatory on the manifesto, or the author of the manifesto, said was you know, if he were to add a 5th value statement to the manifesto, it would have been craftsmanship over crap. So we're reversing that and crap over craftsmanship. A couple of different categories here that we have. A common problem of, well, I'm almost done, I'm at 90% complete. What does that mean, right? It's that almost done state. And what we want to get to is done. You know, where are we really done? How have we actually delivered value? How have we gotten that value in the hands of some customers? How have we enabled the feedback from that done? So if we're at 90% done, we aren't to the point where we're able to really get feedback. We're actually not delivering, and we don't even know how much that last 10% is going to take. Right? Typically, I think you oftentimes said, you know, the first 90% of the project takes 90%, and the last 10% takes the next 90% of the project. So, you know, common problems we see. Velocity over quality. This is another thing. If I want to produce crap really fast, I give the dog a bigger bowl. So, you know, we focus too much. I think sometimes the teams get emphasized, oh, I want more velocity, and how do they get their velocity up? They get velocity up temporarily by sacrificing quality. And really effective, high-performing teams don't let this happen. Right? They're focused on the long-term stability, the long-term delivery, and this is just a very clear anti-pattern to focus too much on velocity at the sake of quality. On the question of quality, are we trying to test quality in, which I consider to be a potential sin, over building quality in? And this is the example here is the test pyramid, which a number of people have spoken about. Mike Cohn, Naresh Jain, and a number of others have pulled out the test pyramid, and the issue that we have with inverting the test pyramid. On the left-hand side, we have a common problem where we have very few unit tests, a few integration tests, and we try to solve our problem by building up huge amounts of automated GUI tests, by taking this huge number of manual tests that we've built and try to automate them through GUI tools. And invariably, we find that this type of approach is very fragile and really is in essence of trying to test the quality in, whereas high-performing teams and teams that are building a good, solid foundation will build a foundation of very significant automated unit test coverage, and then build up different levels of automated integration tests, and have a smaller number of automated GUI tests that still are useful for testing end-to-end workflows, and then still do some manual exploratory testing where they can really push the extremes and see what they can So it's a much more balanced approach to and building quality in so that we have much less reliance on manual effort and much more in focus build on every time we're building new code, we're building test harnesses and test structures that help us know that we've got quality built in.
Todd, can we take one question on this one? There's some confusion or some question rather on how much automation, test automation can be accomplished within a sprint. So versus what needs to come after. So can you talk a little bit about what's the right balance to strike?
So I think that I've seen teams that are able to get essentially to the point where they feel like they have automation coverage that they could release on every sprint all the time. So there are teams that have managed to do that, and they've done so by really having a concerted effort towards it. And this is even on some legacy products where they've built some of their test harnesses across the board at the integration level and at the even at the unit test level, and they have a broad coverage across the three areas of the pyramid. So it is very possible for teams to do it. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. I think what generally I look to is I say new code should be, new code is generally no fundamental excuse why you shouldn't be having unit tests around new code. So always be looking to make new code better at a high quality. Legacy code is always a challenge. You really want to try to look at what sort of things you can do to build more workflow level test harnesses around legacy code, because and workflow level under the GUI is the best approach that I've seen there. That at least gives you some degree of confidence that you haven't regressed too significantly. So large legacy products that are starting with nothing are going to have a hard challenge. But you can always do a little bit. It's an investment that you've got to make in order to build, to really bring that technical debt down. But new products, really, if you can get a developer mindset towards building quality in, what we find is that you can keep your velocities actually higher. Your net overall velocity and net of the delivery of the product is actually higher by building using test-driven development approaches.
Let's take one other follow-on, if you don't mind, Todd, on this topic. Looks like there are a lot of questions on this one. So have you seen teams have more success with integration tests or unit tests? Are unit tests really the holy grail?
I had one team that had almost no unit tests, but they had a really, really solid collection of integration tests, and it was entirely appropriate for their type of problem because what they were effectively, it was a petroleum engineering solution where it was solving a large-scale integration problem, a large-scale matrix system. And so the integration layer was really critical, and not that they couldn't have benefited from unit tests, but actually unit tests on their own would not have been sufficient by far because the real challenges showed up in integration challenges. They weren't showing up so much in the unit challenges. So that team was really effective. They had a strong collection of integration tests. So I would say that some people have, I think Mike Cohn has written about this, that the integration layer often is the forgotten layer. And I think that people say, okay, well, I'm going to do unit tests, and then I'll do a few automated GUI tests, and I'm done. And the key part of that integration layer is that that's really, you're testing the business logic. And so I think that there's a significant value to that integration layer that is important. One over the other, you want both, but if you had to choose, I'd say it's set up the context. How much can you do at the unit layer? If you've got legacy code, I'd be tending to go much more towards the integration layer as your place by which you could get some value quickly. If you've got new code, I'd be looking to aim at what you can do at unit level, but then also make sure you don't forget the integration layer.
Okay. Good. Thanks.
All right. The same category here. We don't want to go to the extreme. To some people, I see a lot of people saying, well, technical debt is fundamentally evil. I don't want any technical debt whatsoever. but to me, the virtue is understanding and really having the conversation around technical debt. And technical debt is debt, and there's good debt and there's bad debt. I love the metaphor that Ward Cunningham came up with for technical debt because it puts it in business terms. And in business terms, we know what debt is. We know that there's good debt. People go buy houses and they get good loans on the houses and they pay it off over time. That's a calculated good debt. There's also bad debt. Louis the loan shark is not a good guy to go get debt from. Not a good guy to get the loan from, because you're going to have to pay out huge amounts of interest. And if you don't pay out the interest, you're going to break your legs or something. You don't want that type of debt. In our software, there's some times where we have some reasons to be expedient. Where we want to do something to meet a market need. There is a form of debt we're willing to take on, and we need to understand that. So the point of it is the technical debt is there. It's a conversation that we can have, and we can frame it in the form of, we can do this in order to meet some particular needs, and then this is the cost to service the debt. The important part of technical debt is not the debt itself. It's how much does it cost to service that debt, which is really what's your interest payment. And if you know what your interest, you can understand how much it's costing you to serve it, then you can make those business decisions. As do I make an investment in order to buy that down, or do I live with that cost of interest because it's actually enabling me to go faster in other ways? So it's really understanding the metaphor of technical debt is as a business metaphor. It is interest. It is a payment cost to service that debt, not just arbitrarily technical debt's always bad. And you hear that from some people who go too far on the craftsmanship side and take that. So. And then the last one in this category is called, I call it cost of crap over cost of delay. The metaphor, the story I use here is the Ford Taurus. When it was first coming out in 1986, it was a huge success for Ford Motor Company. More or less saved the company. And the project manager for the Taurus did all sorts of things in order to make sure that he had a successful product. He did all sorts of focus groups. He made sure that he used that feedback and iteration in terms of redesign of the car. And the result, it was a huge success in the marketplace. The problem with it is he was 6 months late in his delivery. What happened? He was demoted because even though he saved the company, he was 6 months late. So not a good thing. They have the follow-on version of the Taurus. The project manager made sure of one thing. He made sure he was on time. Cut all the corners he could, no focus groups, none of that. Was on time. Really not a very successful release at all. The real discussion we want to have here is what's the cost of delay? I mean, how much was the cost of having that 6 month delay when in fact you added a significant value to the organization by having the right product? So we had this issue in software about, oh, we got to be on time, we got to be on time, we got to be on time. But the reality is there's numerous, countless examples of software that has been late, but has been hugely successful. Microsoft Word was about 4 years late, but it totally changed the dynamics of the word processor market when it came out. So it's all about having this discussion, what's the cost of delay? And if you're in a new product development space, oftentimes that cost of delay is relatively small. If you've got an existing product, you might have a very, very, very small delay or cost of delay because customers are still connected to you. So you have to understand it. If you're trying to come out with something for Christmas season, then yes, in fact, cost of delay is huge, and you got to make that. But oftentimes we get so fixated on a date when in fact what really matters is a value proposition. So it's about having that conversation. All right, let's move on. Potential sin number 5. This one is called iterations over releases. I find a lot of teams do really, because of the tool, and oftentimes this I think is an anti-pattern of the tooling. The tooling enables them to do so much that they really focus on, oh, I can do more and more and more. Let me really try to get my optimize my iterations. And what I really care about is delivering what the business cares about, which is a release, right? And so if iterations are an artifact, releases are getting something in the hands of business. If iterations are good, then potentially shippable increments ought to be great too. I'm not saying that iterations are bad. I'm not saying potentially shippable increments are necessarily bad. what I really find a challenge is when teams get fixated on these, and these become more important to them than the release. So I really don't care too much about an iteration burn down. I do care a lot about understanding, how does my release dynamics work? Do I have a release burn up? And am I focused on what matters for that release burn up? In this one, also with iterations, we tend to say, oh, we have to have commitment. What we really want is not so much commitment as much as focus on value. If you have a team that has focus on value, the essence of commitment is a lot less. There's good sides of commitment and there's bad sides of commitment. What you want is teams that are focused, and that's what I think the point is. You want teams that are focused, and you want the value of that from the focus on value. What can get in the way is teams will start committing, and then you have where you can get into real trouble with this is if the team misses their commitment, it can create trust issues, or if the team is under committing, they can be trust issues. So what we really, I'm at the point where commitment to me is a lot less important than if I get a team that I can understand and clearly identify that they have the focus and shared ownership. That's really where I'm aiming for. And then the last one in this is capacity planning over velocity planning. I think, again, it's an essence of trying. I see a lot of people who have been former project managers, and they feel like, oh, I've got to really optimize each individual capacity and get hours and track everything. And what they're working with is estimates which are high degree of uncertainty, and trying to optimize for something which is a high degree of uncertainty. What you're really looking at, I think, is what I look for is what's the team's throughput. And team's throughput, the system's throughput is determined by their velocity. So I'm looking at their velocity. Their velocity is what's going to give me an indicator of what is the system able to produce. If I get to work as a team, I work much more as a focus on what the team can do. If the team's able to produce 30 points in an iteration, and that's been their average, that's what we should expect from them. And it's a much simpler planning process. And the details are the team can work out their details, but actually doing detailed capacity planning, I've seen backfire so frequently because the capacity planning doesn't usually take into account any degree of uncertainty, and as a result, it ends up being, I think, a lot of wasted effort and potentially setting the wrong expectations from different stakeholders that sometimes get a hold of it. So, velocity planning is a much smoother and a much more indicator of team performance than a lot of individuals. Moving on, let's go to potential sin number 6. This category I called illusion over reality. So what are we doing to fool ourselves, and what can we do to actually get back and have real reality show up? One of the things that I see fools teams is they focus on gross velocity. They say, oh, my team, I've got 30 points per iteration, and I've got 90 points left, so I'll be done in 3 iterations. Well, what have they forgotten? They've forgotten to include any element of scope creep. And if they've been, what I see fairly consistently, is that scope creep does continue to creep. It doesn't tail off. I think a lot of teams think, oh, well, we've found all the scope creep we're going to have, and we're not going to have any more. It's not my finding. What I find is that if you have it and it's fine, if it's trending like we have on the right-hand side, in a bit of a linear fashion, it's going to continue to trend in a linear fashion. It's not going to drop off. Actually, if you look at that one, what really dropped off there was the velocity dropped off. It tended to peter out a little bit. That actually is a more common problem because our velocity drops off as we get towards the end game oftentimes. So we fool ourselves by going with a gross velocity, thinking I'll be done when in fact if I've got a velocity of 30 points and but my scope creep is 10, then my net is only 20, and my 90 points won't take me 3 iterations. My 90 points will take me 4.5 iterations. So that's some very quick math. I think it's the real value of having burn-up charts. Can't emphasize burn-up charts enough. They really tell the story very quickly, tell you a lot of information, and a great conversation in the business. It's a great conversation between stakeholders and the development team. One of the other things we fool ourselves is by not, if we're going to use story points, by having stories that are in the backlog that don't have story points, well, if you're going to use tooling on that, that's going to take it across as a 0. Much better to throw in, even if you may not know enough to estimate it. It's better to estimate it, or if you're going to do that, it's almost better just to count stories. Counting stories, at least you don't have this consequence of having unpointed stories. So, but I see a lot of teams have things in their backlog, 0 points, and then they're surprised because then all of these things show up as scope creep eventually. Another problem with illusion, but we think we're doing great with velocity when in fact we're just letting quality suffer. This one here is, are we estimating in the form of guessing, or are we using real data in terms of a release burn-up chart that help us with forecasting? So it's the difference between the guessing we do and real data to help us with forecast. And that's why it's important that we have and collect the data. So this is where tools are really helpful. Tools are really helpful for helping us with this. You don't need to do a lot, and you can get release burn-up charts really nicely. And in the category of estimation, microestimation over macroestimation. This is, again, are we trying to do things are we spending a lot of time trying to do things at the task level, and what value are we getting? Or are we really looking at macroestimation, which is how is the system performing? How is our velocity performing? What is our burn-up chart telling us? And that macroestimation is in forecasting can actually tell us something that will be of meaning to the business. And are we collecting vanity metrics, or are we collecting decision metrics? There's lots of ways we can collect vanity metrics. One potential vanity metric would be number. And how you know it's a vanity metric is that you can easily cheat to get the result you want. And so, one potential vanity metric might be is number of commitments met, number of iteration commitments met. Well, how do I cheat? Well, I just make sure that I don't commit very much. There's lots of different ways to look for it, but that's a key indicator of a vanity metric, is that it's really easy to cheat on the metric to get it. And the reality is, if you make a metric that's easy to cheat, what will happen is that teams will cheat in order to get that metric. So what you really want to drive towards is, are you creating metrics that help you enable decisions? Because there's no benefit to cheating, right? If you cheat yourself out of decisions. So you want teams to be making metrics that help them make decisions, and then help them guide those decisions and own those decisions. All right, so just lastly, potential sin number 7 is, we call it organizational hacks over leadership. What have we done which is really an organizational hack, when in fact what we really are trying to do is inspire great leaders and great leadership? So I think a lot of this, it comes back to leadership styles, and I think my view of this is are we having leaders that are trying to control inputs, or are we trying to control outcomes and outputs? And if you look at a process flow perspective, we have inputs and processes. If we're trying to control inputs and processes, that's really focused in the micromanagement. It's a belief system that if I can control the inputs, I will get some predictable output out. My view, Agile leadership is really about flipping this around. And it's really about how almost all the great control systems in the world, I'm a chemical engineer by background. Chemical engineers do process control. And process control, you've got feed-forward approaches and feedback approaches. Feed-forward approaches are only useful for the very simplest processes. Feedback loop process control systems are very, very stable, and very stable in very, very complex environments. We have in software development a very complex environment. And the way we get stability out of it is by having feedback mechanisms, and that's what agility is all about. It's about delivering things in value, process flow of delivery, getting feedback loops through experiments or delivery of product. Focus on outputs, focus on learning and the feedback loops, and much more value. Related to this is really micromanagement versus macromanagement. Macromanagement, we're looking at the performance of the system, we're looking at the outputs, and we're looking at the things that we can feed back into the system to make improvements. Micromanagement is focused on control mechanisms around inputs and processes. Are we taking sides, or are we serving the whole team? I see a lot of this problem with Scrum Masters. They take the side of the business, and the business loves them as a Scrum. They say, oh, you're great, the great Scrum Master. And why do they think they're great? It's because they're taking one side or the other. The Scrum Master has to be a very neutral role, has to serve the entire team, has to serve all stakeholders. And start taking sides, and it's very much sends you down a real challenge and creates trust problems within the team. Meetings over actions and resolutions. Are we actually driving ourselves towards decisions and processes, or are we just following a checkbox that says let's have a meeting? So a lot of this one, I hear people say, oh, my Scrum meetings are ineffective. So well, I say, well, actually, are you having retrospectives? Are you talking about it? Are you looking at how to get better? This is where your opportunity as a team is to own it. If your meetings are ineffective, make them better, or decide that you may not need those meetings. It doesn't. I get the thing saying, oh, I got to have a daily stand-up because it's called a daily stand-up. Well, no, do what's right for your team. If your team is being very, very effective and finds that meeting on every other day is an effective approach, then that may be an approach that it's worthwhile looking at. So just because it's called a daily stand-up doesn't mean that you have to do it. Use your mind and use your try things out. Use your retrospectives effectively. And then lastly, I've got certification over qualification. Really, certification I find is a bit of an organizational hack. I haven't found a certification system that I like yet. I'm not necessarily against certification, but if you look at it, what we're really interested in is how do we know we have qualified people? And I haven't found a system yet, an existing certification mechanism that supports qualification as the most important thing. So, all right. So my quick summary of the 7 items there, so I think just to get better, use retrospectives, improve incrementally. Don't take on more than, a typical retrospective, don't take on more than 1 to 2 items. And get some coaching if you need it. We've got our teams, we use some inside coaches, some outside coaches. Sometimes it's really, really good for teams to get some perspectives from outsiders. And with that, Hemant, turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you, Todd. And I know we had a number of questions along the way, so just as well that we ran out of time. But I really appreciate you covering these topics in great detail and with good color commentary. So we'll stop here and respect everybody's time and stay tuned for our next month's webinar. If you can just advance the pages, Todd, just a few pages, so we put that page up front, which talks about on October 21st. Yeah, this one. We have a webinar coming up on running microservices on Docker, an experience report, so stay tuned. You'll receive invitations to this, all of you. And thanks again, Todd, for joining us for this Agile anti-patterns topic. Excellent topic.
Thank you. Thanks.